Have you ever really looked at a shadow? I mean, really looked at it. Today we're going to explore how a simple shadow does more than just tell you the time of day. It turns out, the way its shape changes might just be a blueprint for reality itself. So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with a super simple observation you can literally do at home. Then we'll touch on the textbook physics behind it. And from there, we'll dive into a really fascinating framework from our source material that sees this everyday thing as a universal code.
All right, so let's get right into it with a simple experiment.
Picture this. You grab a piece of cardboard and cut a shape in it. Let's say a triangle. Easy enough, right? Then you hold it up in front of a light, maybe a small round lamp.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. When the cardboard is super close to the wall, the shadow is a perfect, crisp triangle. It's an exact copy of the whole. But as you start pulling the cardboard away from the wall, something wild happens. The shadow starts to morph. Those sharp corners get all soft and rounded until eventually it's not a triangle at all. It's a circle, the exact shape of the lamp that's making the light.
So what's going on here? I mean, how does physics explain this little magic trick? Well, it all comes down to the fact that light doesn't just travel in straight lines, it also acts like a wave. There's a specific name for this effect. It's called diffraction. And really all that means is that light waves have this tendency to bend and spread out a little bit when they're squeezed through a tight opening. And that bending is exactly why the shadow's shape changes as you move it further away.
You know, physicists actually have names for these two different stages. When you're up close in what they call the near field, you're seeing something called Fresnel diffraction. That's where the shadow is all about the shape of the whole. But when you get far enough away into the far field, it switches over to Fraunhofer diffraction. At that point, the little hole basically turns into a projector, kind of like a pinhole camera, and it starts showing you an image of the light source itself. So the big takeaway here, it's all about distance.
Okay, so the physics makes sense, but this is where our source material comes in and asks a really compelling question.
I mean, what if this transition from a local, specific shape to a universal, original source, what if that reveals some kind of fundamental operating system for how everything works, how things come into being, change, and eventually return to where they started? So the source we're looking at proposes this framework called the dual caustic universe, or DCU for short. And it suggests that this whole shadow thing isn't just some random quirk of optics. No, it's a real-world physical demonstration of a universal process that it calls 237. You can almost think of it like a cosmic operating system. All right, so this 237 code, what does that actually mean? How does it map onto the shadow experiment we just walked through? Let's break it down number by number.
So first up in the process is the number 2. The source calls this stage Razim, or the split. This is the cardboard hole itself. It acts as a boundary, creating this really simple binary choice. Light either passes through or it gets blocked. This is the origin of difference, the moment of decision.
Okay, so after the split, we get to the number 3.
This stage is called Raḥīm, or formation, and this corresponds perfectly to that near-field shadow, you know, the crisp, clear triangle. At this point, the system is basically holding on to the local information. It's encoding the specific shape of the boundary it just squeezed through.
And that brings us to the end of the sequence with a number 7.
And this is Raḥmān, or the return. This represents the far field shadow, the circle. You see, as the light travels further and further, that local information, the memory of the triangle, it starts to fade. And the pattern expands, reorganizes, and ultimately collapses back to its origin, the actual shape of the light source. So when you lay it all out like this, you can see this perfect one-to-one mapping. The hole in the cardboard, that's the split, the 2. The triangle shadow nearby, that's the formation, the 3. And the distant circular shadow, that is the return, the 7. So according to this DCU framework, what we're watching isn't just a series of things happening with light. It's way bigger than that. It's a fundamental action-reaction cycle that the source argues actually governs existence itself. Think about it like this. The action is when you impose a local, temporary form on reality. That's our triangle. The propagation is that form expanding and reorganizing as it travels through a universal field. And then there's the inevitable reaction. The system always resolves back to its universal origin, its fundamental truth. In this case, the circular light source.
And this is where we zoom out from our simple little cardboard experiment to a much, much grander scale. This is really the core argument of our source material. The idea here is, well, it's pretty profound. It's that any local shape, any individual thing or structure is really just a temporary encoding. It's an intermediate step. But the ultimate, unchangeable truth of any system is its source. The shadow of the triangle, no matter how sharp it is up close, has to eventually give way to the reality of the circular light. So that leaves us with a really provocative thought to chew on. If the physics of a simple, everyday shadow contains such a deep, repeating pattern, this universal blueprint of splitting from a source, taking on a temporary form, and then ultimately returning to that source, it makes you wonder, what other fundamental laws, what other blueprints for reality are we looking at every single day without really seeing the code?